Hey, how's it going? Cool. I guess just so I get a sense of the room here, like what years are people in school right now? Like freshmen, sophomores, super senior? Yes, yes. Juniors? Okay, and then just seniors? Okay, mixed bag. Okay, got it. Cool. And how many of you guys have you heard of hashtag Starring John Cho before? Yeah, okay, a couple people, cool. Do you guys know who the actor John Cho is? Some nods, some nods. Okay, cool. This helps me out a lot because then I can explain less or more depending on who we're talking to. Cool, so I'm really excited to be here today. I really want to thank AF Reno for setting this up and the university for making all this possible. This is my first time in Reno. I'm from New York, don't really get out this far west very often. So I'm really psyched to be here. And I'm going to be talking about the rise of the new Asian American. We'll get into what that means and the impact of something like that. But first, that's a very big picture of me. I'm Will. I used to work in advertising in New York. I worked at agencies like Sapient Nitro. It's now known as Sapient Razorfish, and TBWA Chiat Day. As a strategist. So my job was a lot of the time doing market research, looking for cultural trends to try and figure out, what's going to be that one spark of an idea that we can then go to a creative team to come up with a campaign or a project on. But moreover than that, I am Korean American. I was born in Philadelphia. I grew up in Hong Kong. Then I moved to Boston, and now I'm based in New York. So been primarily like Asia and the Northeast is where spent most of my days. And yeah, so I think, but that's kind of what my background is. I think the reason why I'm here today to talk to you guys is to really talk about a project called hashtag Starring John Cho that was directly informed by my love of film. And so, I'm a big movie buff. I love watching all kinds of movies, whether they're indies, whether they're, big tent blockbusters. I love, just scrolling YouTube constantly and looking at various different channels that dissect cinematography, dialogue, and really trying to get into the weeds of what makes a good story resonate with people. And usually I find that it has to do with the characters that the story conveys and talks about. So you have a story like Whiplash, who is centered on a character who is driven for greatness, who wants to be one of the greats, and really will do anything to push to that level. You have a movie like Brooklyn, which is an immigrant story of a woman coming from Ireland, settling in Brooklyn, and really trying to figure out who she is as a woman, how she deals with love, how she does with loss and family, and really trying to figure out and learn about herself and who she is as she comes into womanhood. And then you also have Get Out, which is just a great movie. And if you don't know why Get Out is a great movie, go watch Get Out because it's really important, and it's really important. And Get Out is one of my favorite movies too as well recently. But I think growing up, I started to realize that a lot of these movies that I really love and that I watch again and again and again often don't feature people who look like me in them. They very rarely are people who have parents that are Korean or have lived abroad or come from the same background that I do that are interested in the things that I like. And instead, I have to find ways to connect with these characters through either universal means or trying to figure out, where do I fit in this world? And I think a lot of times growing up, that has been a struggle, try and learn from these examples that I see on screen that aren't me, while also trying to figure out who I am in the context of all of this. And that can definitely create moments of doubt, of moments where I don't really feel comfortable in my own skin, where I feel like growing up I always have to be one thing or another, and it's something where I think it's not necessarily, it just doesn't feel right. Like I feel like this isn't fair, or this isn't something that is really representative of the world that I live in. And it's interesting because as you kind of see and get the broader landscape of where the movie industry is, it seems as though it's that they share that sentiment. So it wasn't until it was 2014 when Sony got hacked and there was a big email leak. And one of the big quotes that came out of that was from Aaron Sorkin, who's written movies like The Social Network, like Moneyball. He created West Wing, movies that have severely, impacted American culture. And during this time, Aaron Sorkin was trying to develop a movie called Flash Boys, which was based on, let's say, a book of the same name, which centered on kind of like a Wolf of Wall Street story about a guy who was Japanese American, and his name was Bradley, let me get sure I get this right, Katsuyama. And they were going through the process of adapting it and writing it, and Aaron Sorkin, Oscar-winning Aaron Sorkin, said that there aren't any Asian movie stars. And I think there was a level of discomfort while also realizing, yeah, this is probably how the world thinks of Asian American people, and that they aren't stars. They aren't the people that are leading the way. They're probably more people that are doing the low-level work, probably people that are being very studious, probably doing the things that are not necessarily imbued with leadership skills necessarily, but they're fitting a role that isn't at the forefront. And so it's like, okay, well, maybe this is just how the industry sees it, how this is just, how Hollywood as a business works. And then a couple years later, this happened, where at the Academy Awards in 2016, where Chris Rock was hosting, he trotted out 3 little Asian kids and proceeded to call them PricewaterhouseCoopers' most dedicated, accurate, and hard-working representatives. And this got a big laugh. And I think this was something that, as I was watching the show, definitely didn't sit right with me. And it's one thing where I can say, okay, an industry thinks of Asian Americans in a certain way, but it's clear to me that through the reaction, through the laughs, that this must be how culture sees me. How culture sees me as someone who is just going to be punching numbers all day and is the butt of the joke, and is not someone necessarily that is up there with you carrying the torch. And I think what was most prominent about this moment was that in 2016, hashtag #OscarsSoWhite blew up. So April Reign, who created Oscars So White, this black woman who wanted to talk about diversity, who wanted to talk about recognition of people of color when it came to awards, when it came to representation. This was the moment in time in which this conversation was at its peak. And in this moment, someone decided to say, hey, this other group of people of color, like let's make a funny little joke at their expense. And so for me, feeling as if this is something that's happening in culture, it's not just industry-wide, showed me and made me feel as if there must be something wrong here. There must be a disconnect that either I'm not getting or other people aren't getting that can be addressed. And I think when I read this report that came out of UCLA, it came out of the UCLA Bunch Center, and what it did is that it came from a report called the 2017 Hollywood Diversity Report. They put out a report every year, and in the past 4 to 5 years, it's always come to the same conclusion, that film and television content that is more diverse tends to be more successful, both among white and minority audiences, and it delivers a better financial return on investment. Basically, the more diverse your content is, the more financially successful it's likely to be. They also make points in there that the less diverse your content is, the less successful it's going to be. So it's clear to me that when you have movies like Fast and the Furious, when you have a franchise like Fast and the Furious, and you have actors who are Hispanic, you have actors who are Asian, you have actors who are black, you have actors who are whatever The Rock is. Like, it's clear that there are gains to be made economically. There's money, there are people buying tickets to see stories with these people in it. And same thing when you have movies like Coco, when you have movies like Girls Trip, when you have movies like The Last Jedi, which feature dynamic, interesting stories from people of color that are nuanced, that aren't stereotypes, and it can do so well from a financial perspective. For every one of those movies, you have a movie like Blade Runner 2049 that came out recently. Set in a future world, in this like cyberpunk world that is clearly influenced by Asian aesthetics, and yet there are no Asian characters in the movie. And so instead you just have all these white people running around this Asian world and no one who looks like this doing any of the running. Or you have movies like The Great Wall, which tells you a story of how Matt Damon proceeds to try to save China. How this one white dude is going to save all of China from monsters and dragons and soldiers who are trying to kill him. It's up to Matt Damon, because Matt Damon is the only person in the world who can save this country. It feels a little weird, right? It feels like I see some nods, like it feels kind of uncomfortable. And then for me, you also see movies like 12 Strong, which came out recently, which is another kind of like Chris Hemsworth vehicle for him to really prove that he can carry a movie after Thor, and yet it's probably not going to go there. But he keeps getting those chances. He keeps teeing them up. He keeps hitting striking out, but they keep giving him those moments. So if all these movies are telling me that you can have a diverse movie and it can do well, then why aren't we seeing that diversity more represented? And especially, why aren't we seeing that diversity represented amongst lead roles that you're seeing? Why aren't we seeing the hero, your main protagonist, be someone who's a person of color, if it seems as though having a more diverse cast can boost your box office return? And instead, we have movies like Captain America, where you have Chris Evans, who is playing Captain America, who's saving the day, who's a symbol of patriotism and bravery. You have Chris Hemsworth, who again, is doing Thor and putting muscle to save the day, to save the world. You have Chris Pine, who is a supporter of a feminist, a hero, and is there and is leading the way and is being the love interest and showing that he can really be there for a female protagonist. And you have Chris Pratt, who has all this wit and charisma and is so charming, saving the universe, saving the galaxy in Guardians of the Galaxy Volumes 1, 2, and so on. And so it's really weird is that, like, we all see this, right? We all see what's going on here. Like, it's not just me. That, like, if your name's Chris and you're white, like, you'll probably do okay in Hollywood. Somewhere along the line, someone will think, hey, you've got a shot, you seem like a hero, kind of a thing. And that's not to say that, like, I don't enjoy these movies. I think all of these movies are great. And I think what I love so much about these films is that they make you see the universal values that they all embody. Whether it's bravery, whether it's heroism, whether it's courage, whether it's someone who can be a romantic, someone who can be an idealist. But we don't. It's all kind of like the same shades of Chris that we're seeing, and that's not to say that all these superhero stories or all these big box office hits don't want Asian influence. I think it's very clear if we look at history that Hollywood has benefited and profited from stories, or tried to profit, I should say, from stories that are rooted in Asian narratives, but it's always done in a certain way. So these are some individuals from movies that kind of go back to around 1926. So in 1926, there's in the top left corner, there's a character named Charlie Chan, who's played by Warner Oland. In the middle top right there, you've got in 1956, you have John Wayne playing Genghis Khan. Around right in the top right corner, you have the infamous Yellow Facing by Mickey Rooney as playing Mr. Yunioshi in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And even more recently, you have this guy over here, Jim Sturgis, who plays a character rooted in Jeff Ma in the movie 21, which is based off of the infamous MIT blackjack card counting crew. So this practice, which is known as whitewashing, has been consistent throughout Hollywood, throughout the history of Hollywood. And yet it seems antiquated. It seems as though in 2018, this doesn't seem quite as relevant, that movies wouldn't do this quite so much anymore, where you're taking Asian narratives, Asian storylines, Asian characters, but you're just kind of erasing the Asian people from them. And instead you're substituting them with white people in the hope that somehow, because it's a white face, it'll be more relatable, it'll be more authentic, which I think is very hard to buy. And especially now, while we might consider this type of practice so from like a bygone, antiquated era, it's still happening today. Very recently, in the movie Ghost in the Shell, you have a character whose name is Motoko Kusanagi being played and set in a Japanese future, played by Danish, Polish, Swedish mix Scarlett Johansson in the movie Doctor Strange. You have the Ancient One, which is rooted in a Tibetan character who is responsible, who's the catalyst for the main protagonist's growth, played by Scottish actress Tilda Swinton, which is really hard because I really like Tilda Swinton, and I think she's amazing, and this was not fun to watch. Or more recently, you have in Hellboy, which is going through a reboot phase right now, Major Ben Daimio, who's a Japanese-American character, being cast filling the role is a British actor named Ed Skrein. So remember this face right here, because we're going to come back to it in a little bit. But know that this practice is consistent and it's still going on today. And with each moment that this happens, there's typically a controversy that follows, typically a backlash that follows, and yet we continue to see organizations, studios go again and again and again, making the same choice to erase these Asian narratives. So if I'm seeing all these movies and I'm trying to figure out, okay, why don't I see myself represented in them? I'm asking myself, where are the Asian American movie stars? Is Aaron Sorkin right? Is he right in thinking there just aren't any? They're just not out there, and so that's why we can't cast them, because they don't exist. There's some like mythical unicorn that lives in fairyland that is just unattainable. And if that's true, then why can't they at least envision a future where there is an Asian American lead? Has it not crossed their mind that somewhere, somehow, eventually, probably there might be one? So is it that they can't see it, they can't imagine it? I don't know. So, but I know how I felt about it, and I know I wanted to do something about it. So in New York, it was like a cold winter, maybe spring day, and at like 3 in the morning, I ran down into the subway with the sticker that I just printed, feeling really ambitious, and I hopped in the subway, took it up to 72nd Street, and I was thinking, okay, I'm going to do this, and I did this. So I just printed out a sticker of like an Asian dude's face. I was like, yeah, let's go in, let's figure this out. And I went in, and I basically vandalized a subway poster, which was very scary for me because I don't do that kind of thing. But so, after looking around the cops and seeing no one was there, I just kind of like smacked it on there and ran back away. And I felt really good. I felt like I did it, solved it, problem, done. Saved racism in America, thank you. But I think after I got over myself, I waited. I waited to see, like, surely someone would take a picture of this, someone would share it, someone would, tweet it, something, and nothing happened. Nothing. I like waited a couple of days and like there was no reaction. So I thought, okay, maybe the world isn't ready for this. Maybe this is just too crazy of a notion to see that an Asian dude could be in a movie with George Clooney and Julia Roberts, and somehow that would catch on. So maybe. I didn't feel good about it, but I had to take a step back and realize, okay, if I'm going to make this argument, and if I'm going to say that Asian American people do have a place in this world, I need to make sure that my argument is sound, that I've thought of the basis that there's not just a passionate reason just because I feel Asian people should be there, but there should be a logical reason why it's in America's best interest to have Asian American leads. So here are a couple numbers for you. The one on the left is 21 million. So that's the population of Asian Americans in the States today. Accounts for roughly 6% of Asia's population. And so it's small, but it's there. And there's definitely a number of Asian Americans here who live in this country who are doing their thing. But the number that I think I'm more interested in is the number on the right, which is 3.4%. So not a super sexy number, not a super big number, kind of random. But 3.4% represents the rate at which Asian Americans are growing in the United States. And this number actually, and this rate is faster than any other ethnic group in America. So faster than Latinx communities, faster than Black communities. It's growing in number and it's growing quickly. So what I see here is that we're here. We're in this country and we're growing quickly. And I don't think that's necessarily something that you can just take for granted. The second, Asian American buying power is projected to grow to 1.1 trillion by 2020. First, we'll address the GIF on there. So this is Constance Wu from the show Fresh Off the Boat, which features an all-Asian American cast centered on Asian American stories. And this is her at the grocery store trying to negotiate her groceries and saying, it's $4.99, I'll pay $2, because Asian mothers want to haggle and they're frugal. Like we want to save money. But what happens is that, even though this community is one in which we're all trying to put our dollar as far as we can, Asian Americans are growing in terms of their ability to spend in the United States. And it's over the past 15 years, it's grown over 200%. So this is also something that's outpacing any other ethnic group in America. What's crazy too is that when it comes to movie going, Asians actually go to the movie theater more than other groups. So Asian Americans go to movies on average around 6 times per year. The next closest group is from the African American community, which goes around 4 to 5 times per year. So we're seeing a couple things. Is that, you know, even though we're 6% of the population, when it actually comes to lead roles in Hollywood, we're really only around 1%. So there's this weird disconnect where we're growing in number, we have more buying power, we go to the movies more than any other group, and yet when it comes to seeing ourselves represented on screen, when it comes to seeing us in lead roles, that number is disproportionate. It doesn't really reflect our reality. And I think as I'm sure many of you can attest to, when we look at brands, when we look at products, when we look at companies, we want to know that they are reflecting our values, that they care about us, that they have our interests at heart as well. And so this is something that is persistent in today's kind of community where there's a frustration boiling over, where how do we as Asian Americans get some frickin' recognition? How do we, you know, say we're here, like we're trying to do this too, like we're all in this together, and I think it really comes down to a very large extent how society perceives us, where it's not a matter of us just simply raising our hand and saying we're here, like, come on. I do think that there is a certain level of we need to combat the notions and the ways in which the country, primarily white people, see Asian Americans today. And I think to do that, and I needed to take a look at that subway poster and be like, okay, I need to rethink about who I'm really talking to here. How am I going to engage these people to really get what the argument I'm trying to make is? So I thought about 2 people, or 2 groups of people. I thought about this person. This is Sam. Sam is my sister. She loves me very much, and she's very passionate and supportive of the things that I'm into. And then this is a group from a recent producers roundtable from The Hollywood Reporter. So I decided that these are the 2 groups I need to talk to. I need to talk to one, the person that gets it, person that understands what I'm going through. So we'll start with Sam. So Sam, she and I have had this conversation a million times. She has heard my arguments inside and out and me complain and argue about why don't we have Asian American leads? Like, why isn't this a thing yet? And she talked about it's on the tip of her tongue. And I think in her world, this all makes sense. You know, she works at a media company. She's contributing day in and day out. It's a company that she's surrounded by pop culture. All she does is see new things that are happening in music, in art, in fashion, in technology. And they often don't have Asian faces, even though it's a very inclusive company. She very rarely sees people that look like her. But she understands the emotions, the value in which it means to have someone who looks like you on screen. She knows that when you have someone who looks like Kelly Marie Tran in Star Wars: The Last Jedi, that it makes a difference to see someone like that. It empowers you to see someone like that. So this is a quote from Judith Kellner, who's an NYU adjunct professor of psychotherapy, and she says, representation makes us feel visible versus ignored. It makes us feel that we matter versus dismissed. It makes us feel worthy versus unworthy. It makes us feel that we have value. And I think this is very true. I think this is why representation matters, because when you see someone on your screen, on your phone, on your laptop, wherever that looks like you, to a certain extent, on some level, you're kind of like, oh, they can do that? Okay, then I can do that. There's a certain, I think it's basic social learning, where you can observe other people and see the things that they do and realize that, hey, if they can do it, maybe if I put myself in a place that is similar to them, I can also do it. It's leading by example. It's the things that you do when you watch your parents and how they interact. You're kind of like, okay, these are the good things that I like, and these are the not so good things that I like about what they do when they talk to each other. And I think this is something that is consistent and that is always something that is on our minds, whether we like it or not. Whether you are talking when you're at an internship and you're trying to figure out how a workplace works out, how people talk to their managers, how people talk to their employees, how people talk to their coworkers. How you guys talk to each other in your classes, how you guys figure out how to deal with issues with your significant others, how you guys deal with your parents. All these things are at stake here, and especially when you realize that it ladders up to how people are treated within your society, how people are treated within your political system. All these things can be imbued by culture, and informed by the way in which and the values that you see of the people on screen. So if I'm a young Asian American and I'm saturated by media and I'm trying to figure out what kind of person do I want to be, do I look to the content that sees me in stereotypical roles, or do I try to look for a role like Rose in The Last Jedi, which is imbued with these values of heroism and bravery, and is more nuanced than the stereotypes that most mainstream media will try to paint you with. So that's what Sam's thinking. That's what she gets. This other group of people on the right-hand side is the other group of people, the people that aren't Sam and don't quite understand her mindset. And more often than not, this group is going to be predominantly white men, and occasionally may include some white women as well, but mostly white men. And so what's going to happen is that you have someone like Ridley Scott, who is this guy right here, who's Oscar-winning director, Gladiator, Thelma and Louise, some of the Alien movies that came out recently. And you're going to have someone like Ridley Scott who sees you and sees himself reflected in culture every day, who sees all the executives, all the garbage men, all the soldiers, the nurses, generals, politicians, presidents, and sees the world reflected back to him, and who doesn't quite empathize with the notion that why does anyone else need to see any other type of person on screen, at my workplace, behind the camera at all? So I think someone like Ridley Scott will look at this and he'll just say that, it's part of the business. It's part of the business. Like I can't mount a film of this budget and announce that my lead actor is Muhammad so-and-so from such and such. He said this when he was trying to explain why he whitewashed a movie named Exodus that he created a little while ago, in which for Egyptian actors, he just put Christian Bale in there and was like, we're good, we're set. And it's weird hearing this as a person of color and just being like, you just like don't believe. There's something in you where this is the association that you make when you think of a person of color, that like not bankable, like can't do it. And I think this is what the UCLA report is directly countering, that it's like, hey guy, like there's actual irrefutable evidence. There's data now. It's not just like how you felt in your heart of hearts that like people of color, not so much. There's actual like data, and there's money at stake if you don't cast with a diverse mindset. And so it's hard as someone, again, who is Asian American, to hear this and think, yeah, like I can still see myself up there though, but clearly this guy just doesn't get it. And so I tried to think about, okay, who is a bankable person that we could shove in Ridley Scott's face and make so obvious? Because I think what's clear is that as we see more and more movies, more and more franchises that come out, things are changing in the way people go to movies. Like back in like early 2090s, right? You had a lot of films where it'd be like Brad Pitt starring in blah blah blah, Tom Hanks starring in blah blah blah, and you would just be like, Brad Pitt, there, going, ticket bought. Or like Tom Hanks, love Tom Hanks, don't really care about the movie, but Tom Hanks is great, let's go see that movie. But I think what you have recently is a trend of films that are built around story, that are built around narrative, built around character before they're built around an actor or an actress. So you have a movie like The Hunger Games, which at that time Jennifer Lawrence was up and coming, but wasn't quite the massive star that she is now. And so to that extent, it is a risk a little bit. She's not quite as proven, but she went to star in Hunger Games, and the rest is history. Jurassic World with Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt, before Guardians of the Galaxy, all those things, he had a role in Parks and Rec. He was a chubby, lovable guy, but he wasn't quite, the buff superstar that he is now. Clearly, someone had to decide this guy has something, and let's take a chance on it. And so, with these movies that are built around story, how is this type of thinking not extending to people who are Asian American? So I tried to think about this, and I was like, okay, let's go find someone who Hollywood can undeniably be okay with. So I Googled Asian actors. This is what comes up. It's a lot. It's often, sometimes the same face. But I think a lot of the times, it's growing in number. I definitely remember, I cannot tell you growing up in Hong Kong who an Asian American actor was. I think the closest thing I would get to Jackie Chan, and then I realized Jackie Chan is not Asian American. Like, he's not. And so what's happening is that what's interesting to see is that there are more and more Asian actors out there that are trying to battle this stereotype of what it is to be an Asian American male. And what that normally is someone who is not masculine, who is not an object of desire for their love interest, who is often playing the sidekick, the tech whiz, the martial arts ninja, and is often either relegated to like a few lines, if any, or if they are, maybe it's not necessarily in English. And these are things that have pervaded my entire life growing up, that that are just unintentionally imbued upon me. And so to see this group was very encouraging to be like, okay, there are choices out there. But I think I decided that if I'm going to really pick someone that's solid, that can be, you can't refute it, that is so obvious that it's like, okay, let's just do it. I decided you needed 4 criteria. The first was you need to have a cult following. So basically, you need to be someone who people talk about a lot. You need to be someone who people want to see on screen, maybe have seen on screen before, and has a certain place in your life, in your memory of you've seen this face before, and you're like, yeah, that guy should be in more things. He had to have leading man experience, so he had to be someone who had already done this before. Like, you can't take a risk on someone who has never done it. Like, you need to choose someone who has the practice, has the experience, is already well received as a leading man. You need someone that has critical acclaim. So someone, you can't just be a pretty face. You need someone that can bring in the truth and depth and other cliches about what it means to be an actor that bring dimension to character. And you had to have box office success. Now, this for me was a big one. I think this was going to be the deal breaker if I couldn't find someone. That you needed someone who people would pay to see. Someone who people would buy tickets for and go, I will put my butt in a seat to see this person. And all these things, basically, all just so you could envision this person, because I'm not casting anybody, but just so you could believe that this is possible. And so I went back to the list and started looking, and there are so many great people that are starting to come up right now. Ki Hong Lee, who's in like the Maze Runner franchise, Daniel Dae Kim, who's been around for a while but is still doing his thing, Steven Yeun, who's having a crazy moment right now. I'm such a big fan. But really, no one could hit all 4 things, which is crazy. And it took me a long time to really come down to someone and to validate that, does this one person have what it takes? And that person was John Cho. So let's see how he passes. So John Cho, he has a cult following. He has over 220,000 followers on Twitter. People like what he says. He coined MILF and is the reason MILF exists in the American lexicon today. You're welcome. He also was in Harold and Kumar and the Harold and Kumar franchise and broke so many barriers in terms of associating Asians with weed smoking and realizing that Asians get high too and that's fine. You just do your thing. Everyone needs their stress reliever. But so he has this place in movie culture, in people's view of Asian Americans, in the way that he has represented us in ways that have gone beyond the fact where people want to see more of him. He also has leading man experience. So he was in a show called Selfie, which was on ABC, in which he plays the co-lead to his love interest. And he ran for one season, and got a lot of praise from places like the New York Times and NPR, and really saw him as this is his chance to be a leading man, and was received very well. Critical acclaim, so as I mentioned, NPR, New York Times, places of note that are known for analyzing film and providing thoughtful views on how people perform, nails it. He was also in a movie last year called Columbus, which is a beautiful movie, very small movie, but it's a beautiful movie in which he plays a Korean American and brings subtlety and nuance to what it is to be a Korean American person trying to take care of his father and creating a friendship with another character who shares a like-minded sentiment. And was on lots of best of lists, Independent Spirit Awards, a lot of recognition, and box office success. Nails it. So Harold and Kumar just wasn't this one-off funny movie about Asian stoners, but it was a huge franchise. It grossed over $100 million. And he's also been part of the Star Trek franchise. So as Sulu, even though it's more of a subordinate role, this franchise is responsible for billions of dollars of revenue and is only continuing as more Star Trek movies get made. So it's interesting to see that once I figured this out, I almost had to kind of pinch myself and kind of step back to be like, has no one actually noticed this yet? Is this a thing where, am I just like the one person who's just like fanboying John Cho like really, really hard and like no one's really done it? And I think that for better or worse, it is. So I try to figure out how do we make it so seamless that if you take something like this, which doesn't work, and which people aren't really seeing the rationale, people aren't seeing the reasoning as to why John can be a lead guy, how do we make this point more obvious? How do we make it so you can't deny that this guy deserves a role like this, that Asian Americans deserve a role like this, and how can you disseminate that message quickly in a way that people just, you see it and you get it? So I turned this into this. So this was starring John Cho, which was a social media movement to show that Asian Americans can be leads in movies and film, but also that Asian Americans can be leads in our society, in our country today, and that we can play multifaceted roles. We can helm franchises. We can drive ticket sales. We can be prominent members of our society, and that it doesn't look that crazy. And the way that I did that is that I photoshopped John's face onto a bunch of prominent movie posters to show you what it would look like if these movies had Asian American leads in them, and that it doesn't look that nuts. It actually looks kind of seamless, and that all you really had to do was just recognize that this is possible, and show that for all the roles that the 4 white Chris's play, like John can do that too. Not a big deal. And so the two platforms that I used to share this message was, one, a website that had a lot of information about a lot of the numbers that I showed you just now, which had to do with the growth of the Asian American population, the buying power that Asian Americans are wielding, the fact that only 1% of leading roles go to Asian Americans, and paired it with a Twitter account that helped share this information. So you kind of had just like a feedback loop going back and forth where you learn about it, you talk about it, you learn about it, you talk about it. And this way that you could amplify this thought with a lot of content that came in the form of movie posters. So that way you could see that John, so here playing Steve Rogers, playing Captain America, can really be the hero that saves the day, maybe. John in Me Before You, playing the romantic lead, playing someone that a love interest looks at adoringly and raptures the intention of their partner, and falls head over heels in love, has some drama, has a fight, falls in love again. Or you can be someone like Tom in 500 Days of Summer, where you are a fundamentally flawed, semi-narcissistic, idealistic individual who also has grand notions of what love could be. So all these things are really just try to show that Asian Americans can be all these things, that it's not just a matter of stereotypes, it's not just a matter of pigeonholing, but really just to see the human being within Asian Americans, and that it's not so ridiculous to see this future. Crazy, I know. And so what was really exciting to see is that there was a large response to it. The movement got 1 billion impressions worldwide. It won a couple awards. It won a Shorty Award. It won an AAF Mosaic Award. Over 140 videos from other media companies created about the content. The hashtag was used over 30,000 times within a month or so of its launch. Some other fun facts is that the audience of the people that interacted with the hashtag skewed female to male 60 to 40%. So this was a movement that was definitely supported by women more so than men. So one, I think it's just like, people love John Cho. He's a good looking dude. We get it. But I think coming from people who are from these marginalized communities, understand what it's like to want to fight for representation. While not surprisingly, states like California and New York were big hubs where this conversation was prevalent in, but places like London, Ontario, Texas were also places that talked about starring John Cho in a large number, which was definitely a surprise to me. I think me and my sheltered Northeast life didn't really expect one to travel to London or places like Ontario to talk about this conversation. So it was very, very, very gratifying to see that people cared. But I think that as I was making this project, as I launched it, as I saw the reaction to it, there were things that made me feel uncomfortable or made me just kind of realize some certain things about myself that I had to look a little deeper. And so I want to share those things with you guys today. So some of those things revolved around things like, do Asian Americans deserve to have this conversation? Like as I was making this, I really thought, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe no one cares about this conversation. Maybe. Some other things were things like laughing at myself when I was making these posters. So it's one, weird to just like Google John Cho and like download like 20,000 pictures of his face. I stared at his face for a very long time. It's borderline very creepy. No, it's just creepy. And as I was putting John Cho's face on top of Chris Evans' face and trying to imagine a world in which Captain America was Asian, I found myself being like, nah, like that's too crazy. Like that's too wild. That's too wild. And I think it's weird because then I had to think about why am I laughing at this? Like why do I think that the notion that someone like a character like Captain America, who's a symbol of patriotism and strength, and someone who fights for the underdog, why is it so crazy that I can't imagine an Asian person being in that role? And it was an uncomfortable feeling, and I think it was something that made me realize, okay, like this matters. This has some greater purpose here of creating a poster like this. And I think one of the also bigger things was I was doing an interview with a Japanese newspaper, and I was very curious because I was talking to a Japanese newspaper, like that's crazy. And two, I think I was thinking, why would a Japanese reader audience want to know about a project like this? And so I asked the reporters, like, hey, like what's going on? Like, why do you think your readers would resonate with them? And literally the thing that she said was very, very simple. She was just like, our readers don't know why this is a thing. Like, we don't know why Asians want representation in America. So I had to think about that and then realize what she was really saying is that to the outside world, to the greater global community, people don't view Asians as American. That to the global community, or at least to what she was telling me about her readership in Japan, was that when they look at America, America is almost exclusively white and black. Asians don't really factor in to the fabric of America in that way. And so once I got over myself there, I was like, okay, this has some greater purpose to then either educate or hopefully get some people to relearn their perception of America, in that it's much more multifaceted than that. So after thinking about all these things, it was like, okay, well, we put the project out, people clearly care about it, but where do we go from here? How do we think about what this means to be an Asian American? And I think that I had to think about really what it meant to be Asian American. And I think for me, what I love about the project is that while it's called Starring John Cho and it's about John Cho, it's also really not about John Cho. It's just about being an Asian American person. And while it does have a Korean American face on it, it's not really about being Korean American in this society. It's about being Asian American in this society. So the first thing that I think I had to realize was that being Asian American is more than what most people think it is. So the groups that you see on here are the 19 groups that the Pew Research Center deems Asian American in their research. So most people will probably knock off Chinese, Indian, Korean, Japanese, but really that bottom half of the screen is where you get into mixed territory where people are either unaware of what that means as in relation to being Asian American. And so really realizing that being Asian American is being part of a very diverse group that has different stories, different immigrant experiences, different families, different cultural nuances than I think what most people would consider Asian American. And what's tough is that, so this is how a certain research center defines it, but I'm sure there are many other subcultures that embody what it means to be Asian American. And if we're just painting it all with the same brush, if we're just painting all with this notion that Asian Americans are a quote unquote model minority, that they do well in school, that they have medium incomes that are larger than most, that they come from well-off families that all want to drive them to succeed, we're doing a disservice to all the other groups that count as Asian Americans in this way. So if you think about groups that, like the Hmong, Burmese, Bhutanese, who actually are part of groups that live below the average US poverty line. I don't think this is something that people normally typically associate with being Asian American. So really realizing that there are so many other stories to be told creatively is also kind of an exciting opportunity for people who are creatives or people who feel that they need to have a voice for representation. And hopefully feel that now is a time where they can really voice that. Second interesting thing that happened is also realizing what Starring John Cho means for people that aren't Asian males. So this is hashtag Starring Constance Wu, which was created by this woman named Bonnie Tang. And so this came shortly after Starring John Cho launched, in which she photoshopped faces of Constance Wu onto mainstream movie posters. And what I found so interesting and captivating about this is that the basic execution is the same, right? You're just you're photoshopping faces one thing onto another. What I thought was so interesting is that there are nuances of what each project addresses that are vastly different from one another. So Starring John Cho, you're facing stereotypes of Asian males, people that are emasculated, people that aren't seen as leaders, people that aren't necessarily at the forefront of their industries. Constance Wu is batting it similar, but also very different realities of what it means to be an Asian woman in America, which is either being seen as a submissive individual who is either at the whim of other people in their society, or being perceived also as a model minority who will go along with what they're told, or also being fetishized or sexualized in a way that does not account for the humanity that lives within them. And so I think what's very interesting about hashtag Starring Constance Wu is that it also starts to make you have this conversation about how do you view Asian women in American society today. Because if we're just thinking, oh, Asian women are slim, light-skinned, submissive people, you are discounting all the other facets of what it means to be an Asian American woman. This also made me think of how Asian Americans deal with people that are beyond their group, their culture. So one thing that was very surprising for me to see on Twitter when Starring John Cho lost was how much support Black women came for Starring John Cho. Black women also love John Cho, but I realized that there was such a huge support from Black Twitter, from film Twitter, that made me realize that they were also helping to amplify this message. And I think what happens is that when we realize that issues when it comes to like systemic racism or systemic oppression, as an Asian American, I've grown up and I know that oftentimes we say, that's not our problem. Like this isn't something that I have to deal with. This is something like my parents were upper middle class. We were upper middle class family. Like we lived to a certain privileged life. Like let them deal with this. And I think that it's not fair. And I don't think this is something that we can allow ourselves to shelter from, because in the end, it matters to all of us. And at the end of the day, a rising tide lifts all boats for us as a group, as a culture, as a society, to help one another out. And what happens is that while as people of color, we often assume it's on us, that like we have to take the burden of dealing with all this crap, when it's, yes, on the one hand, it's very much on those who live in a more privileged position to reach out and to understand and to empathize, but it's also up to us to reach to other people of color and realize that we need to give them our support and realize that there is a interconnectedness in how this all works. So it's not an easy conversation, it's a hard conversation, especially when it comes from being Asian American who have a history in anti-Blackness, who have a history in colorism. And so when you realize that part of the quote-unquote American dream very early on for our immigrant ancestors or the people that came in generations before us was to immediately remove all cultural markers of ourselves, to immediately become our version of whatever whiteness meant in that stage. It also meant us doing that at the expense of people from other cultures. Colorism, a practice of basically thinking that whiteness is your ideal in terms of skin color, and thinking that those that are lighter skinned are more prized or more attractive or more beautiful. It's a notion that I think you can date back to like ancient times in Asia when you're thinking, the royals sat in the houses and weren't necessarily tanned by the labor work that they would have to do from the sun. all the way down to today where light skin is prized, and you see, whitening lotions, where you see Korean beauty trends like hail light-skinned products, or skin products that will make you more light-skinned. And these are things that aren't necessarily taught to you as an Asian American growing up. I definitely know in middle school and high school, there were very rarely units on Asian American history. You had Japanese internment, maybe you had Chinese exclusion. That's it. Like that's all you really got, and you didn't learn who your idols were. You didn't learn about people like Gracie Lee Boggs or Yuri Kochiyama, I'm pronouncing that right, who were instrumental figures during the civil rights movement. These are all things that I think I, as an individual, had to learn much later in life, either in college or after, and hearing up from other people who are like-minded. So when these things happen, we can't let ourselves say this isn't our problem. We can't let ourselves say this is something that doesn't affect me, because it does. At an institutional level, it does. And I think one example of that I'll share with you is I was at a panel a year and a half ago. It was in Vegas, and it was about it was called an Oscars So White panel, and it was talking about Asian American representation in film and in media, and branded ourselves as an Oscars So White panel, and I was really excited. I was really honored to be on it, and I thought, we can have some constructive conversation. I didn't realize afterwards that Oscars So White was created by a black woman. How many people here knew that? Sweet, we got three. But yeah, Oscars So White was created by a woman named April Reign as a movement to talk about representation. And so for us to not necessarily recognize that and acknowledge that, fits into a practice of glossing over Black history in favor of just talking about ourselves. And I just don't think that this isn't something that we can continue if we want society to go where we want it to go. And so if we're thinking about, battling the model minority myth, thinking about where women stand in our society today, and our interconnectedness with other cultures, I think we're seeing the rise of this generation. And it's this generation called the new Asian American, where there are a few certain qualities and attributes that are imbued within us that we feel that we have a right to. So one is the audacity of equality. Thinking that I have an equal right as anyone else to be here, to have my say. Another one is expectations of a culture rooted in filial piety. So one, I think, as any Asian American person can tell you, our parents have a very loving / sometimes oppressive presence in our lives. And so, however, I think as a result, we feel that it's a burden and it's a responsibility to continue to live up to their expectations that have come from giving up a life that they previously had to come to this country, or to feel as though we have to be there and make them proud, so that way we can continue our family in future generations. And lastly, a demand to be woven into the American fabric. So this is something where it's representation coming in forms of pop culture and coming from the American narrative. So realizing that talking about America as a country and American identity includes us, includes our contributions to this narrative, so that way it's shaped for future generations. So you have people like Anna Akana, who's talking about things like mental health and depression, and bringing that to the forefront on her YouTube channel. And that's something that, oftentimes these mental issues are seen as taboo within the Asian American community. You have Hassan Minhaj, who is discovering meaning in his immigrant story, what it's like to see his parents coming here and starting a life, and seeing how that affects him and his relationship with his parents now, as well as his family in the future. You have Chloe Kim, who, with her gold medal win, is the embodiment of, so says her father, of being the American dream. And I think what's so interesting about her is that she's so unapologetic about embracing both sides of her heritage and saying, I am Korean, but it also means I'm American too. And being American also means being Korean American. Justin Chon, who directed a movie last year called Gook, which explores relationships between Asian and Black communities during the Rodney King riots, and seeing how those things, how they cross over, how they are filled with stereotypes and with hatred that is rooted in notions that are not necessarily informed. Or you have Ali Wong, who's kind of redefining what it means to be a feminist when it comes from an Asian American perspective, how you can still stand for all your rights while also wanting a husband who went to Harvard Business School. So with all of this generation, with this big generation coming, are we seeing the type of impact that we want to see? And that's where we bring it back to this guy. So you guys remember this? So we have Ben Daimio on the left, Ed Skrein on the right, British guy playing another Japanese dude. But recently, shortly after a controversy, Ed Skrein made a statement that said, "It's clear that representing this character in a culturally accurate way holds significance for people, and that to neglect this responsibility would continue a worrying tendency to obscure ethnic minorities and voices in the arts. Therefore, I have decided to step down." So he saw this, he saw the conversation that was going around this, and that had been happening before, and decided that this was the right thing to do. And the response was massive. So you have 47,000 retweets, you have 159,000 likes. Big name, like Fortune 500 companies can't buy social media presence like that strong. It's hard to do. And so what we're seeing is that it clearly resonates with groups when people make the right decision like this. And it may be considered brave, it may be considered revolutionary. To me, this is just like, this is the right call. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. But it's hard when you have someone like Ed, who he has to make the decision when there are so many other people informing that should have informed this casting to begin with. When you have directors, casting directors, talent agents, what have you. In this case, you have Ed being recast by Daniel Dae Kim. It's great. And so what we hope to see is more of this type of support translating into actual tangible impact. So one is that we have Black Panther coming out this week. So pumped, so psyched. And I don't know if that conveyed how excited. I'm so psyched, guys. I'm really excited. And so what's really cool is that Black Panther is being forecasted to have $165 million box office opening weekend, which would make it the biggest opening weekend in February in movie history. And it's being largely supported by Black communities who are not just buying one ticket, but buying another ticket, buying a ticket for their friends, for schools, for their community leaders, everywhere. And what's crazy is that also this year, in August, we have Crazy Rich Asians coming out. So this is a movie that features an all-Asian cast, which is based on the book Crazy Rich Asians, written by Kevin Kwan, and it's coming out this year as well. So I can only hope that this will have a similar rallying point and will be a similar rallying cry for Asian Americans to say, we need to step up with our money to say and support content like this, because this is the only way that we can convince the gatekeepers and the powers that be that this can be a continuing trend as we go further and further. And this is specific to the film industry. And as we see things like Master of None, as we see shows like Fresh Off the Boat, which try to integrate more of these stories, hopefully we're seeing it in more mainstream media as well. But that's not to say that there are challenges. So who knows what this is? Are we aware? Okay, great. So Pepsi put out their campaign, which was pretty tone deaf, and tried to capitalize on things like Black Lives Matter and things like any cultural community to show that Kendall Jenner can save us all. You also have a campaign by Dove, which chose an unfortunate screenshot to use as part of their social strategy to talk about one of their products in which a Black woman was taking off her shirt and seemingly transformed into a white woman. The context of this is complicated. I think the spot when you see it, it's people doing kind of like a Michael Jackson black and white moment where like people are turning into different ethnicities. But the screenshot was very unfortunate. And then you have something like this where H&M had a small Black child wear a hoodie that says "coolest monkey in the jungle." So it's weird where you can have a world where movies like Black Panther exists and a world where moments like these happen. And I think what we need to realize is that it needs the informing needs to come at all ends of the process. So you can't just blame this on the creative director to say, oh, he didn't really think about it enough. You also need to think about the account executive at the beginning who was thinking, why did I think this would be bad for my client if we put this kind of an image out? You need to think about a strategist who's sitting in the room being, I don't think that our consumers really want an image like this. You have to think about all the other facets and individuals that are involved in a project like these who are typically not when it comes to advertising, which oftentimes people work in silos, very, very set off from each other. And you need to have that collaborative environment where people feel empowered to say, might not be the best call. This is a shot from Tide's Tide ad during the Super Bowl. Which was just my favorite campaign, the Super Bowl, if you guys have seen it. But basically, has nothing to do with my point. Basically, the reason why I put this up there is because in the Super Bowl, there were about 70 ads that played, 70, featured hundreds and hundreds of faces. During the Super Bowl, I just did like an unofficial count. how many people in these ads were Asian. I got to around 15. Yeah, and then that was it. And that was it. So it's crazy to me that in a moment where America is watching, where the world is watching, brands and agencies don't necessarily think that it would be prudent to put an Asian American face in content like this. And I think it speaks to where our culture and our society views and sees and values Asian American faces, and just how oftentimes that nuance is left out of the picture. So then you have things like the Ram ad, which used MLK's quote, which resulted in huge backlash. But it's not to say that brands aren't doing certain things well. I think there are moments. So we'll start in top left and just go around, where Honey Maid had a "This Is Wholesome" campaign in which they featured families that had LGBT families, and the ways that they were raising their children. You had P&G, which had a campaign called The Talk, which chronicles the moment in which Black families need to discuss about the realities of our society today and how that affects children, how it affects parents, spouses, significant others. You have the Refinery 29 67% Project, which tries to shed light on the fact that even though 67% of Americans identify as plus size, only about 2% are shown in media today. And then you have campaigns like YouTube Music, which shows things like little Asian American kid just like jam into hip hop in the subway, which shows a woman in a hijab spitting a killer verse. These things are valuable to people and seeing themselves represented in culture. And I think as you guys go out into the world, you need to think about, if I'm making things and if I'm thinking creatively and I want to make projects or I want to start new movements, do I create descriptive things? Do I create things that are reflective of the society around me? Or do I create more aspirational things that I want or I believe society should be headed to? And I think really choosing and really being clear with one or the other is very important as you go out into the world and make new things. This is more of a slide for the people that are interested in advertising or any research capacity is if you are going out into a world and you're doing market research or you're doing things which involve talking to people, doing secondary research, there will often be a lot of tools that say they have the right answer, the numbers, what have you. None of this means anything if you're not actually talking to a person about what it means to be in that experience. So even, this is just my caveat, especially as someone coming from the advertising industry who we love using numbers to sell you on our opinion and our story because we think we're right and we need you to pay us. But I think it's important to also realize that on top of these numbers, you need to have a little bit more control, nuance, and context so that way these stories matter and come to life. These are two organizations in which I'm involved in and an alumni on that I started participating in during college. That if you're interested in media, in communications, in advertising, are instrumental in one, getting your foot in the door, and also getting involved in your community. So on the left-hand side, it's an organization called MAPE. It's run by the 4A's, which is the American Association of Advertising Agencies. And what they do is that you apply, if you're selected, they place you at agencies across the country, and they set up your housing. They give you opportunities to intern at real-world agencies for 10 weeks. It's a very rigorous process. It's a very rigorous 10 weeks, but basically the hope is that after your 10 weeks, you're ready to jump into advertising and contribute directly. For me, I thought it was so important because this is where I felt like I really found my voice. This is where I felt like I was surrounded by people who were also people of color, and I felt as if I had a voice that mattered and I had a voice that could be shared. And so it was very formative in my experience and giving me that confidence that I can go out and make a difference. On the right-hand side, it's an organization called AdColor. Oh, by the way, this is me in the circle, if you couldn't tell. I don't really like smiling a lot or smiling awkwardly. But what it is that it's also an organization for the advertising industry in which they teach you how to talk about diversity in your workplace or as a student or as someone who's kind of coming up in the industry. So they have a conference every year. City changes location. But I was accepted in a program called AdColor Futures, which recognizes people that are early in their advertising careers that are making a difference in the community. So I highly recommend if you are in school right now, applying to MAPE if you're interested in advertising, getting your foot in the door. If you are about to embark on your career, think about AdColor. It's not advertising exclusive. They think about people in communications, in tech, in publishing. They really just are committed to how to talk about diversity on a daily basis, not so that you're just having one after-school meeting about it, but that way you're talking about it on a consistent, compassionate level with people around you. So, in summary, these are kind of my 4 recap points. I hope that we got to talk about and understand why representation matters, why you should be supporting inclusive content, embracing the new Asian American and realizing that this is a group that is not going away. We're only growing. We're only becoming more influential in the society, and that you can put your diversity into practice so that way it doesn't become this meaningless buzzword, but you can apply to organizations, be part of networks, introduce yourselves to people who are part of those networks that you can ask questions about, and really try to make a difference that way. So hopefully, if we do all these things, that we don't necessarily have to go to movies and live in a world where Hollywood is just run by 4 white dudes named Chris, but we can go see movies where some movies star an Asian American guy named John. So I really want to thank the university for having me, for AF Reno for setting all this up. If you have any questions, if you want to talk about this more, that's all my contact info. Please hit me up. Happy to talk or network, and we can discuss this more offline, but I really appreciate all you guys listening. Thank you.
So we have time for a couple of questions. Is there anyone who has questions for William? Go ahead.
So I saw that you had a tweet from John Cho, like recognizing that this movement was happening. I was just wondering if you had any other responses from him.
I have. It's funny. That was the first question at the other place too. So John and I, we've kind of like stayed off and on in contact since then. He followed the account very quickly after it launched, and he like reached out. And so he was coming to New York to do press for Star Trek. And so we went out to dinner and had some drinks and just kind of hung out. And I think what was really, I don't know if it was encouraging or disheartening, but so many of the issues that I think he brought up when he was starting out early in his career were very relevant to my experience coming up and not having mentors that look like you and not really having a path as we were trying to figure out where we fit in our careers, or people that could say, hey, person that looks like me, like you're probably going to go through these types of things. So it was nice to bond over that, but I think we're both hoping for a future where there are more resources, more people who are willing to talk and connect and learn from in that way. He's also just really chill.
Anybody else? Over here.
Do you think movies like the Ghostbusters reboot with Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy, do you think those hurt these kind of movements more than help it?
How would you think that they heard it?
Well, the Ghostbusters remake was just very poorly received because it seemed like it was just pushing diversity for the sake of the producers saying, hey, look, we're not racist or sexist.
Sure. So I think my challenge to that was it'd be very hard for me to believe that someone just making it simply for the reason of saying, let's just throw women in it and see what happens. I think I'm all for if you can tell a good story, if you can create characters that have nuance, that transform over time, it really is independent of what the pre-existing product is. So I think even if you see something like the Ocean's 8 movie that's coming out pretty soon, right, which is like a female version of Ocean's 11, I think that you have actresses that can bring nuance and deliver performances that are interesting and that aren't just necessarily a knockoff of something else, but are adding new levels of conversation to it. I'm in full support of that. And I think, honestly, it's a thing where white men get so many chances to make box office failures. So many chances. I'm not underselling you on the point. If you look up Chris Hemsworth's IMDb page, it is littered with movies that have not done well. And yet he continually gets more and more movies. So not to put him on blast or anything, but I think what's interesting is that it's not right that I don't think that women aren't afforded that privilege of being able to say, hey, you know what, like this movie, it can fail, like why not? And I think it comes with Asian Americans as well, where every opportunity that we get, we have to be like, this is the one. If this, like Crazy Rich Asians, a part of me is very scared that like if people don't go see that movie, I won't see another like all-Asian movie for decades. Like that's not an exaggeration, but literally like decades will go by. People will just be like, not worth it. You didn't come out to that one thing. which is why movies like that, like Black Panther, are so important to support.
Anybody else?
Can I create a hypothetical for you real quick? So you said
Sure.
that John Cho was one of the only Asian actors who passed your 4-part test. So let's say that they start casting him in these movies, but there are no other Asian actors that are passing this test that are bringing in the money that he is. So they're using him as their Asian staple. Is it then up to him to start turning down these roles, or who would be the one to be saying, like, let's go out from John Cho, let's start using other Asian actors instead of using him as a staple?
Sure. I think what's interesting about that is that when you're cast in these big roles, right? So let's say like Robert Downey Jr., for example, right? When he was first cast in Iron Man, that was like he was kind of on the down of his career and then not doing so well, and then got cast in Iron Man and everything just kind of went up. Robert Downey Jr. is making like 60 mil on a movie. So let's say John Cho is cast in a movie like this, right? And it's like, boom, box office success, killing it. At some point, the reality situation, he's going to outprice himself for a movie like that. So I actually don't think it would ever come down to a point where he would have to be like, I need to give this up. I think if a movie like does that well, it'll just be financially sound to find cheaper options. And I think that for someone like John, if you have a data point where it's clearly people will come out in droves to see an Asian American lead, it will only broaden the executive's view to say, hey, more people who look like John can probably maybe do as well as John. So I don't think it would actually ever come to that point, but it's possible, but no, I don't see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you can kind of explain to people the way that you see the role of the agency and packaging of talent, and I'm not sure if like everybody here will understand the role of the talent agency. So William Morris Agency, and what the challenges of having that kind of gatekeeper that's silent. I think that the really interesting conversation that came out about the reshoots for the movie that was just out.
All the Money in the World.
Yeah, Kevin Spacey.
Right.
They had to reshoot, and Mark Wahlberg got 1.8 million.
Right.
And
Michelle Williams got like $1,000 or something.
$800 a day or something
Yeah.
or $80 a day, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So, oh man, this might be out of my. So as my experience pretty much lends more towards like it's like media and advertising. But the way that I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, is that certain scripts or the way certain things get sold within Hollywood oftentimes need brand name association. Is that fair?
Yes.
Is that so? If you can say I have Natalie Portman ready to go in my movie, more producers, more investment companies will think, oh, it's a sounder investment because I have someone who has an established brand name to give money to. And so I think where that often comes to the case is that someone may see a script that is not necessarily prudent for them, that has a role that's not necessarily prudent for them to embody, but that's if that actor or actress does not attach her name or director attaches their name to it, it's much less likely to get made. So I think even I've had conversations with John where we've talked about things where it's like, if I can get some writer to connect with John, that's much more likely than that writer just trying to figure out, oh, let me just send this into the ether of Hollywood and hope that someone gets it made. But I think what's problematic is that what then happens is that you have this model about building productions around certain individuals without necessarily taking the story or the audience into account. Yeah, so I think that's yeah.
And this goes across, it's multiple projects, so it's not just a singular project. It's not like the one project. It could be this packaging happens for 3 or 4
Right,
movies
right.
that have longer kind of like connections. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Let's thank William one more time.